When I was growing up, one of the constant fixtures of television were the shows of Gerry and Sylvia Anderson, Thunderbirds, Captain Scarlet, and Stingray. Gerry Anderson in particular was a writer and producer with big ambitions. He always dreamed of making epic science fiction action-adventure stories in the form of TV and movies. The puppet techniques, or supermarionation as he called it, was his way of creating these stories on a fraction of the resources. However, his ultimate goal was live-action filmmaking. By the early 70s, his wish was granted with the one-off series UFO, but the Andersons' truly big swing for the fences was 1975's Space 1999. Space 1999 was a bizarre British-American-Italian co-production, and the series followed those of Moonbase Alpha. In the, at the time, future of 1999, the moon is primarily used as a storage site for radioactive waste, but when these stockpiles of material explode, the entire moon is thrown out of orbit and sent hurtling into deep space. With a rescue mission deemed impossible, the inhabitants of the base choose to use their situation as a chance to explore the cosmos and eventually find a new home. It was an incredibly ambitious production, the most expensive British television series ever made at the time. It necessitated large sets, advanced creature effects, and elaborate special and visual effects. However, clashing creative visions, as well as clashing egos behind the scenes, caused its original showrunner to leave after the first year. When the new incoming showrunner saw fit to make some big sweeping changes to the show's format and characters, the modest but dedicated fanbase quickly lost interest. Space 1999 was cancelled in 1977. But those who enjoyed the show have maintained it as a cult sci-fi series, with spin-off novels, fan films, attempts at a reboot, and the recently announced Big Finish audio dramas. Despite the stars not quite aligning at the time the show aired, it has an enduring legacy and one which I was keen to investigate for this video series. Presentation-wise, Space 1999's large budget is really reflected on screen. To today's viewers, it may not seem especially noteworthy, but it's worth remembering the time this show was produced. On British television, the production values which had come to be expected from science fiction were seen in classic Doctor Who and Blake 7, which, while certainly telling strong stories, were very clearly cheap studio-bound affairs. It's also worth remembering that this was before the first Star Wars movie set the entire film industry ablaze with slews of sci-fi adventure cash-ins. It was also before Industrial Light and Magic's revolutionary visual effects technologies were widely available. This was before the motion-controlled camera techniques used in Star Wars as well as Battlestar Galactica and the later Buck Rogers in the 25th century allowed space action to really pull off a sense of scale and fast pace. The visual effects shots in Space 1999 used the much older technique of hanging models from wires and flying them through miniature sets or against elaborate matte paintings. Advanced optical compositing on a TV budget, even one with as large a budget as this, was virtually impossible. Therefore, considering everything you see in this show was created almost entirely in camera, it's incredibly impressive, and with the veteran special effects teams of Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet, as well as the James Bond films, Space 1999's action set pieces are terrifically well executed. The same goes for the overall production design, which merges the realistic near-future sensibilities of 2001: A Space Odyssey with the ray-gun gothic aesthetic of countless B-movies and comic books. While it may resemble the famous Stanley Kubrick movie in broad strokes, make no mistake, this is the softest of soft sci-fi. In fact, the show's ignorance and/or disregard for real science can be laughable at times. This isn't Arthur C. Clarke, this is Flash Gordon. The uniforms are a little too Star Trek the Motion Picture for my tastes, but the base itself and iconic Eagle spacecraft are endlessly charming. The Eagle especially feels like one of those little ships that could, akin to the runabouts from Deep Space Nine. Extremely practical craft, constantly used for missions not really fit for purpose, and no matter how many are blown up or crashed, there always seems to be another to pick up the slack. The music as well is a highlight of the show. Barry Gray's efforts for the first season really echo that grand John Barry sound, but infused with the contemporary 1970s style. The main theme tune might just be the grooviest a sci-fi show has ever had. Character-wise, while there is a grand ensemble, the focus is centered squarely on the trio of Commander John Koenig, Dr. Helena Russell, and Dr. Victor Bergman. Intentional or not, the dynamic between them often resembles that of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. Koenig is the man of action who often bears the heavy responsibilities of command, frequently blaming himself for any inevitable failings. Meanwhile, Dr. Russell is the conscience, always aware of the human cost of various missions and the voice of empathy in most discussions, which leaves Dr. Bergman as the genius scientific mind, the one who can deliver endless amounts of exposition while still being entertaining to watch. However, there are enough differences with these characters to make this dynamic similar but not the same. Koenig, for example, if we're making Star Trek comparisons, more closely resembles Benjamin Sisko at times in his ability to make truly tough calls, sometimes blurring the lines of morality to keep his people alive. And in contrast to McCoy's often cynical attitude, Russell is the eternal optimist, with her good nature being occasionally exploited by the many enemies they encounter. And Bergman's innate scientific curiosity can get the better of him, making him resemble the archetypal mad scientist rather than the grand intellect he usually is. The rest of the Alpha crew are distinct with recognizable personalities, but are on the whole quite two-dimensional. Only Eagle pilot Alan Carter really feels like he's ever on equal footing with the main trio. The rest have their moments, but serve more as plot devices than actual characters, with much dramatic material to get stuck into. As a result, the general characterization of the show can feel a little thin at times, but it's the enjoyable episodic adventures which really compensate for this. Space 1999 is essentially divided into two eras because of the changing showrunners for each season. Season 1 was run by Sylvia Anderson, while Fred Friedberger, a former producer of Star Trek the original series, took the helm for Season 2. Season 1 is made up of some thematically rich and usually very dark, borderline horror stories, whereas Season 2 is a much faster-paced action show. After the solid stage-setting first episode breakaway, the immediate follow-up stars a young Ian McShane whose contact with an alien entity turns him into an energy-sapping vampire, brutally murdering his way through several of Alpha's crew. McShane's talent as an actor perfectly illustrates the classic vampire-like character story of an ordinary man turned into a monster, and no matter how much he is haunted by his actions, is compelled to continue committing brutal acts to sustain himself. I've always found the way the lights flicker off as he walks a subtly creepy touch, but it's his transformation toward the end of the episode into a burnt husk with glowing eyes, which I can imagine providing nightmare fuel for any youngsters watching. Later episodes feature powerful monolithic alien computers lulling entire populations into death from sheer apathy, or an Ark ship driven to cannibalism in order to maintain their race following an onboard disaster. While these stories find plenty of time to fit in some classic disaster movie or space opera thrills, the themes and ideas skew much closer to gothic or even cosmic horror. There is the repeated idea of Alpha catching the eye of powerful entities and getting caught up in unknowable machinations which warp their very understanding of the universe. It makes the dire situation of the crew Alpha find themselves in into a desperate fight for survival, where there are rarely easy answers. The two best episodes from this season are easily Black Sun and Dragon's Domain. Black Sun sees the moon falling into the gravity well of a black hole, with virtually no hope of survival, only the desperate evacuation of a select few. It's one of the few character-centric episodes, not big on outer space thrills, but instead focused on quiet introspection as the various crew members brace themselves for the inevitable. Many small moments which make the usually two-dimensional supporting characters very likable. Meanwhile, Koenig and Berman's ponderous conversation over a glass of whiskey is equally fascinating as it is heartwarming. Dragon's Domain is my personal favourite episode of the entire show. Disgraced pilot Tony Cellini is haunted by nightmares of an alien creature he encountered on a disastrous mission years earlier, but his accounts of events are disbelieved. He is terrified then when Alpha re-encounters the circumstances which led to the deaths of Cellini's original crew. It's a shame this episode wasn't centred on regular character Alan Carter. In fact, that was the plan, but Martin Landau apparently demanded the episode be refocused on him for fear of being upstaged. Even so, Landau and most of the other cast do take a backseat to guest star Gianno Garco as Cellini. He gives a fantastically tormented performance, embodying that Captain Ahab drive to avenge the deaths of his crew and slay the monster. The creature effects are a little simplistic, but the dark tone, strong script, direction, and acting all really convince you of the alien's deadliness, and the episode succeeds in delivering a pulpy yarn with more personal stakes. Season 2, when Freiberger took over, is overall weaker than the first, but I don't think it's the utter betrayal many fans make it out to be. Freiberger's vision was for a more light-hearted action show which could appeal to a younger audience. Because of his remit, the character of Dr. Bergman vanishes from the series without explanation, and a new alien character, the shape-shifting Maya, is added to the cast. While I can understand many fans being disappointed at the absence of Bergman in Season 2, Maya is an interesting and very likeable new character. Her alien heritage and abilities give her a unique perspective on the crew and its mission, and her bigger emotions can be refreshing when compared to the sometimes stiff main cast. Although it certainly would have been cool to see both Bergman and Maya, as I believe Bergman's curious nature would have created a fun dynamic between the two. While the stories of Season 2 aren't as rich as Season 1, the faster pace, brighter uniforms, and emphasis on action still make it a perfectly enjoyable show. The two-part episode The Bringers of Wonder in particular is a great example of Freiberg's new vision for the show working really well. Unfortunately, the lack of strong international sales for the show and its high budget led to its cancellation in November 1977, which I think is a real shame. Space 1999 feels like a show which was just a hair's breadth ahead of its time. The show was literally cancelled just 1 month before Star Wars was released in the UK. Had the show debuted in the wake of such a juggernaut, I could see British audiences scrambling to watch Space 1999, desperate for the same kind of big screen sci-fi thrills, and in those conditions, Fred Freiberger's more action-driven approach may have been more successful. By the 80s, ITV, the original network for Space 1999, instead capitalized on the Star Wars hype by merely importing Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers from the USA, when just a couple of years earlier, they had their own potential hit sci-fi show to fulfill audience demand. These days, I don't think we really need a Space 1999 reboot or remake or anything like that, despite its deserved success slipping through its fingers. There's plenty of good sci-fi on TV and streaming services these days. I am looking forward to the Big Finish series though. As it stands, Space 1999 is a great little novelty which is worth seeking out on DVD or whatever streaming service it may end up on after this video goes out. The 2 seasons which were produced only managed to scratch the surface of its potential, but it's both a great tool of inspiration as well as an avenue for solid entertainment. Space 1999 is certainly worth your time.
To everything that might have been. To everything that was.
Thank you for watching. If you like these videos, subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my patrons or my YouTube members, where you can see videos early as well as some other exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.